right, hello and welcome to another Expert Inside interview. My name is John Golden from Sales Pop, online sales magazine, and Pipeliner CRM, joining you as usual from a sunny San Diego. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Shelley Rosetta, who is in the center of the country in Kansas City, Missouri. How you doing, Shelley?
Hi, John. How are you today?
Excellent, excellent. And Sherry has worked in leadership both at the dealer and manufacturer level. And you have successfully married your love of design, people, and business strategy with 30 years of deep industry knowledge and passion for innovative, creative business development. As a member of the Salomon Coyle consulting team, you work closely with peer groups as a trusted advisor, mentor, and advocate. And what we're going to talk about today, and this is in the furniture manufacturing distribution industry mainly, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. A very small little industry. It's about
Yeah,
19 billion, we estimate.
19 billion. Yeah, that's a little small industry. Exactly. And what we're going to talk about today is how sales leadership's not just sales, drives business growth. And particularly, I'm fascinated to talk about your 6 key metrics sales leaders must master to drive profitability, because it has been one of the challenges over the years. And I had this challenge running a number of companies some years back, is traditionally salespeople and even sales leaders very focused on the revenue, the top line revenue, not
Right.
so much on the profitability of the business they're bringing in. And they tend to use resources that they don't factor into the cost, or give things away
That
or
never
whatever.
happens,
Yeah,
John.
yeah, yeah. So it's a very interesting topic. So what has your experience been working with sales leaders, and perhaps they're having a little blind spot to the cost side?
Yeah, so what we looked at, we do an annual financial benchmarking survey. It's an operational and financial benchmarking survey. So every year we are surveying all of our dealer partners that we work with. And so every year we were starting to see some data kind of pop up in these areas. And what we finally looked at was there were these 6 key measurements. One of them was revenue growth. So if you see year after year that the revenue is not growing.
Mhm.
Um, it's something that we call installed margin percentage of sales, and that's really your total cost of goods and your warehouse delivery and install included in that. And so then we move to sales expense. So how much does it cost you to go through the sales process? Product margin percentage of sales, service margin as a percent of sales, and then last but not least, revenue per salesperson, or what we like to call productivity or capacity of the
Mhm.
seller. And so as we started looking at these data points, we started asking ourselves, do these people have a sales problem, or do they really have a sales leader problem?
Mhm.
And so as we kept digging into this, it really became apparent that it really was more of a sales leader problem, because we either weren't hiring the right people, we weren't, providing clarity to our
Right.
team. So it was a number of things.
Yeah. And typically, I mean, obviously, it is with most teams, but I mean, particularly in sales teams, they'll take their cues from the sales leader. So if managing, say, the cost, or the cost of sales or whatever, isn't something that the sales leader pays attention to, then the salespeople are not going to pay attention to it.
Right. Right.
But I guess, Shelley, you bump up against that age-old issue of the fact that a lot of sales leaders are good salespeople who were promoted into sales leadership, and they don't necessarily have leadership skills, but they certainly don't necessarily have management or good business management skills.
Correct, correct. And we see that all the time, whether it's in our industry or across industries. I think that it is a common thread throughout all industries. When you have this great rock star salesperson and leadership is committing to them that they move up into sales leadership, because they think, if this person can be a
Hmm.
great rock star seller, I know that they can inspire a great rock star team.
Hmm.
And that necessarily doesn't translate into sales leadership all the time. And so when we find that some of those people go there without any type of training,
Yeah.
without any type of honing their skill sets, they really miss the mark in building a really great sales team.
Hmm. So how do you start to get them to be able to pay attention to? We used to call them in company, we did this thing we call the silent killers, and we used to say is, what destroys more homes in the U.S. every year? And people would say like, oh, fire, flood, hurricanes. We said no, it's actually termites. And the problem with termites is they just eat away, and you don't notice them. And
You
one day
never
your
know
house
it.
falls. One day your house falls down. But
Right.
it's the same when you're not watching all the, the use of time, of resources, of that
Mhm.
you can suddenly be eating and eating and eating away at your margins without even noticing.
Absolutely. So when we really look at the sales process coming in, and if you, as a leader, you're not setting some clarity in that sales process, like you said, you will have a lot of termites that are eating away at your profit margin, your efficiency, everything. And so we like to talk a lot about the clarity at the front end of the sales process. And that is really, the burden is on sales leadership to coach their team and develop their team to be good communicators, good customer hunting, right? So instead of bringing in the low potential customers or the
Mm-hmm.
customers that are going to eat up all your time, start to learn how to look for those high potential customers that are going to make good partner customers for the long term, right?
Yeah.
And so we talk about that a lot. And that's something that a sales leader can help develop in their team and set the goals for the team.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you mentioned that about the front end of the process, because that is also an issue that often comes up, with sales leaders, particularly as if they've come from being good salespeople. They will naturally kind of gravitate towards the end of the sales process and want to dive in as the super closer and all of that. But your point is a really good one. If they focus on the front end of it, that's where they can help teach their salespeople how to better qualify, how to make sure it's an opportunity, then you have a better than average chance of closing, as you said, rather than just stuffing your pipeline full of low value opportunities.
Absolutely. And what we find is, when you've been a rock star salesperson, what used to kind of get you high in the process is the slaying of the dragon, right?
Right.
You went out and you killed the dragon, you brought it home for people, right? And then what you have to switch your mindset to as a sales leader is, hey, I want to build something, I want to develop something. So you really have to really hone in on that developing and mentoring and also hiring the right people
Hmm.
for your team too, so that you can develop them.
Yeah, and I think that's always a great challenge too. It's because, this is an organizational challenge too, because sometimes when they put in a sales leader and they just say, "Go hire people like you. You were great. Hire people like you," and then they go, and then people say, "Yeah, you were really successful. How did you sell?" And they're like, "Well, I don't really know," because they're
I just
unconsciously
did it.
competent. Yeah, I just did it, right, right. So it gets back then to um, how do you help people like then profile the right type of salespeople, especially because sales has evolved. I'm sure it's evolving rapidly in your industry as well.
Mhm. Yeah. So really what we suggest that they do is profile them, right? And so a
Mhm.
lot of seller or sales leaders will get caught up in, hey, they're kind of desperate for people, they've maybe lost a couple people or the revenue's not where they want it to be. So they think just adding people is the
Mhm.
answer. And really you want to take your time. You want to take your time and you do want to go through all the assessments that are out there. And there are great assessments out there for people to access. And we always encourage them to do so, because if you get that right person, if you get that right profile, then you're going to be much more successful. And we always say, don't just hire for the skill set, hire for the mindset for your team as well. You want them to fit your culture and your mission and really fit into the team and be a good team member
Mhm.
to the rest of the company.
Yeah, and then if there's not enough, if we don't put enough pressure on sales leaders, then we ask them to coach, right? I say, go coach your people, and they're like, their last memory often of coaching is, high school, somebody shouting at you from the sideline, right? Which isn't professional coach. So again, I mean, I always think that sales leadership and coaching is probably your greatest revenue multiplier if done right.
Yes.
But
Yes.
unfortunately, a lot of people just don't know how to coach. So how do you help people understand the difference between, like, coaching and managing and mentoring and coaching?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's a key point that we really stress when we're going through our sales leadership program is that, hey, do you want to be a coach or do you want to be a player? And so
Mm,
often they have a really hard time transitioning to not being a player because they kind of want to fix things. So if they have a
mm,
seller who's not quite doing it right or not the way that they did it, they kind of just jump in and just do it for them, or even worse, they still keep accounts. So a lot of times sales leaders aren't willing to give up accounts. They want to hold on to them. And that's about the worst thing that you can do. And our data shows that if you just let that go and you truly become the coach and developer of the team, your sales revenue and opportunities will multiply, right? So
mm.
you can manage more people and you will see your revenue grow.
Yeah, and I love that you said about not the way they did it, because that is one of the hardest things. I mean, it is one of the hardest things as you hand things off, or you have people work for you. It's like accepting that people may do things a little bit differently than you did them, but as long as they're getting the result and they're doing it within the confines of whatever process, you have to be okay with that.
Right. And you have to be clear with what your goals are for
Hmm.
them. We often as sales leaders, a lot of the sales leaders that I had, they're always so focused on the goal at the end of the year, right? You
Hmm.
have X amount to meet by the end of the year, and you're maybe are measured on that quarterly. But those are lagging
Yeah.
indicators, those are not leading indicators. So
Hmm.
what are we measuring them on for leading indicators such as activity? What kind of activities are they doing? What kind of KPIs have we set forth for them in their activity level, which will lead to sales generation, which will lead to sales bookings?
Yeah, yeah, because you mentioned, as you mentioned earlier, like the sales process, how important that is, and that is where I think the sales leader can really bring, fantastic value, is making sure, number one is making sure the sales process is up to date and it's applicable for today. I don't know whether you come across this. I used to come across it a lot, where you'd ask people, like, you'd ask a company, say, "Oh, you have a sales process?" Yeah, yeah, yeah. When's the last time you looked at it and said, "Well, we've had it for a few years, but it works fine." And you go, "Oh, that's great. So your buyers haven't changed at all in the last 2 or 3 years?" And you
Right,
go,
right.
"Oh, well," you said, "Well, maybe you." So how important is it that they review the sales process and make sure that it's up to date and make sure that it's understood, so you can get that consistency?
Yeah, I think that you're always reviewing that. You're always keeping an eye on it. And there's so many different, documented sales processes out there, but really you want to make the sales process your own
Yeah.
and what fits to your culture, the type of customers that you're going after. But you're right. You have to keep your pulse on the market and the pulse on your customers. And you have to know, when do I need to adjust this sales process? When do I need to change things? Because that customer journey, there's so many areas of touch points that it might just be one area that you need to
Mhm.
flex on or change because of something that's happening, whether it's in the economy, whether it's in your market, or maybe it's a particular industry that you're targeting that's changing.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, and I think it's important that you don't under engineer your process, but you don't over engineer it either.
Keep it simple.
But because I think the consistency part, and I think that's again where sales leaders can bring such a great value, is in making sure that however many stages or whatever you have in your sales process, that there is enough in that you can say, yes, this qualifies to move to the next stage, and that everybody qualifies it in the same way. Because the
Yes.
last thing you want is to have I say this goes into stage 3, you have the exact same profile of opportunity, but you leave it in stage 2. Now our forecasting is all a little bit out of whack.
Right. And you talk to anybody, especially the manufacturers who are counting on your forecasting when
Right.
your distributorship is tied to a manufacturer.
Yeah.
They need that forecasting. That is how people staff, right? And that's
Hmm.
how we get our products on time, so that they can staff up. So forecasting is really, really important. And to have a consistent way that your company is doing that, and that everyone on the team is clear about that process, is very, very important.
Hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, so process is definitely your friend. And did you find at times that that's maybe something that you have to maybe convince some sales leaders, especially if they've come out of sales, and the fact that process isn't an ugly word, it's actually your friend and it's actually what's going to make you successful at the end of the day?
Absolutely. Process is your friend. And like you said, it doesn't have to be over complex.
Hmm.
It's a matter of being very clear about it. And then also not only the clarity, but making sure that everyone that you've shared that process, not only with your sales team, but with other members of the team, other resources that are involved in that sales process. Because sometimes our accountability partners in our team,
Hmm.
whether for our industry, it might be a designer or a project manager, they're the ones that can help hold you accountable to that process. So it's kind of like your friend saying, you know what, we talked about that. I don't think that wasn't what we talked about. That is a good, company to go after.
Hmm.
And so there's some checks and balances there within your resources as well.
Yeah, I did that at a company around some number of years ago because the salespeople were, shall we say, they're very good at selling, but also very good at leveraging resources and giving away things and sweetening things, and so I mean, obviously they were commissioned, so they variable comp. So what I did was I looked at the other side, the project managers, the delivery, all of that, and I said, okay, I'm going to give you bonus you on our operating profit. So now you guys can go hold them, and it the exact dynamic you're talking about it created, because they would say to the salesperson, how profitable is this deal? Why are you adding that in? You've already sold it. Why are you handing off this free stuff? All of that. And it just changed the whole, it changed the whole dynamic, which is quite, it was quite amusing, but it was quite funny also to see how many ways that we were wasting money, like giving money back. You get money from a customer and then you just give it back to them.
Just give it all back. And we were talking earlier today that salespeople have to remember that the cash is flowing out of the business constantly,
Hmm.
constantly,
Yeah.
constantly, until you get paid, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it flows out a lot longer than it flows back in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think they just don't think about that every minute, every hour that you are working on projects, that cash is just going out of the business until you finally book it and the customer pays.
And the customer actually pays. And I think
Yeah.
that's probably one of the greatest lessons that anybody can learn, because I think it, despite a lot of people when they decide to go off and start their own businesses, it sounds simple and it sounds like it's completely intuitive, but it's not. They
It's
go, well, look, I've booked all of this revenue, but my bank account's empty.
right,
Now I'm out of business. What
right,
happened? And you go, well, yeah, until you get paid, it's called cash flow, liquidity.
right.
Until you get paid, it's not really worth anything.
Well, and those kind of funnel cloggers,
Mm.
if you're overusing your resources, if you have,
Y-
multiple revisions on something, or if you're not giving good communication, and on delivery you're making extra trips, whatever
mhm.
that is just money going out
Yeah.
the door.
Yeah, no, exactly. And remember, and those people have to get paid. And if the money's not coming into the account that pays those people, well, then everybody loses. So
Everybody
it's just
suffers.
everybody suffers. So
That's
just
right.
just finally, Shelley, do you see any other major changes or areas that you think sales leaders should focus on, particularly today?
I think part of it is there's kind of two things that I always look at, and that is, are you holding your people accountable? So I talk to sales leaders a lot, and they'll come to us a lot and say, my sellers aren't doing this. They show up to sales meetings without their forecast, or they had a next step and they didn't do it. And my question always back to them is, okay, so what happened? you know?
Yeah.
And so they have a really hard time holding them accountable to the agreed upon next steps or goals that were set. So that's one thing. And then I think just setting a culture of curiosity and continuous learning.
Mhm.
And really, because what we see a lot is the research is not being done on the front end for customers. So you're not spending the time or slowing down on the front end so that you can move fast, right?
Yeah.
Later on. If you set up the front end in the way that it should be, you can really kind of cruise through the rest of it.
Yeah, and I think that's and you know something, I'm just glad you mentioned that because that is something I think that affects that's not just a new seller or that affects and sometimes it affects even more experienced sellers because you've been doing it for so long, you start to think I don't need to do that, I don't need to do that.
Right.
And
Right.
the fundamentals and oftentimes when somebody gets into a slump, you can track it back to the fact that they're not doing the fundamentals.
Absolutely, absolutely. And sometimes, like you said, the senior sellers are
Yeah.
actually the ones that are more guilty of that than
And
the new people. And some of the things that you have the newer folks doing, they're more apt to do it. They're just like, "Oh yeah, no problem.
yeah.
This is great." So it's usually pushed back because their way has worked for so long.
Yeah, yeah, and you just forget, you just get complacent, because
Yeah,
yeah, hey, I've been doing this for so long. I don't need to do that bit. I don't need
you're
to do
right.
that bit
You're right.
until you're doing enough, until you're not doing enough of those bits that it's biting you.
That's right. That's right. Or it's fighting the rest of your team. Your
Or
team is suffering. You might be pulling in all the big numbers, but your
yeah,
team is really suffering.
exactly, exactly, and your poor delivery people are making multiple trips.
Exactly. Exactly.
But listen, Shelley, thank you so much. This has been very insightful. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with our audience. All of Shelley's information will be below this video. But before we go, please do share a little bit more about you and your organization.
Sure. Thank you so much. Well, I've been in our industry for 30 plus years, so a long time. And I just fell in love with the industry. And really, for Solomon Coyle, our goal is to continue to elevate this industry. And there are some amazing companies in our industry, this little furniture industry of ours. And I think that, when you look at the built environment out there, they touch all those places where we live, work, and play. Right.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so continuing to elevate them and make them operationally excellent, that is our goal here at Solomon Coyle. And we just love working with the industry in general.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, listen, thanks again, Shelley. Thank you for watching and listening. I'll see you all again soon.
Thank you, John.